The other video that I did earlier today was the lecture on planting and transplanting. So this video complements that. This is the lab for this week. And as I said in that other video, you can write this one up as if you actually did the lab with me as your partner, or you can say that you watched me do it, whatever. But it's the live demonstration part, in any case, of the planting and transplanting process. So I'm going to transplant 2 roses today. One from a small pot into a larger pot, and then one from the larger pot out into the garden. And the process is similar in both cases, but not quite the same. The first thing I'm going to do is transplant a small potted plant into a larger pot. And as I said in the lecture, you don't want to use any fast-acting so-called hot fertilizers that might give a salt burn to the roots. But these are all very slow-acting, low-salt materials that will give an overall nutrition to that soil for the next several months. So this is the recipe per gallon of pot capacity, and I will be using a 1-gallon pot. So these are the actual amounts that I'll measure out. I have my pot here that I'm going to use. I'm going to use regular potting soil like we did your cuttings in. So this is Canadian peat and perlite mix. And I'm not going to fill it the whole way full. I'm going to leave maybe a couple of inches there so that I can mix the fertilizer and also have room to put in the little plant, and then I can fill it up to the top later. So I have put the fertilizers in. This is all of the fertilizers. I want to mix those in pretty thoroughly. I do that by reaching down maybe to half the depth of the pot. There's no reason to go to the bottom. And then just kind of lifting and sifting it. I always jokingly say that you should pretend to be an Olive Garden waiter and say, would you like some freshly ground Parmesan cheese with that, as if you were preparing a salad. The goal here is to get this mixed into the top half of that soil so you don't have any lumps of fertilizer lying around. So that's probably pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is prepare my plant to go into that, and to do that I'm going to dig a hole here approximately the right depth. This is the plant that I'm going to be transplanting. It's in a 2-inch band pot. It has a label on it. This was grafted back in December, so it's about 3 months old and is certainly ready to transplant. So as I demonstrated on the lecture video this morning, I'm going to pinch the sides of this pot a little, not enough to really damage roots, but to loosen it up a bit. I'm going to turn it upside down and give it a shake, and it comes out cleanly. One nice thing about these square pots with the big holes in the bottom is you don't tend to get a lot of coiling of the roots, so there's nothing I have to cut off of that. So now I'm going to put this in the pot, and actually I lucked out. That's just about the perfect depth. With roses, as with most plants, I want to end up with my finished soil at the same depth as it was in the original pot, and that's going to be quite close. So I've got some extra soil here. I'm probably going to have to go and get some more. Yes, I am. Filling around that, tuck it in. I don't want to pack it real tightly. It's going to need still a little more soil. But at this point, I need to work pretty quickly because that soil is dry and I don't want to let the roots dry out. I'm going to put a stake in next to this. Roses don't make reaction wood, so I don't mind staking this quite close to the stake. I'm going to take a piece of tying tape and I'm going to tie it very tightly to the stake, but not to the rose. I don't want to pinch that rose. But I don't want this tape to slide down over time. So by making a really tight knot there, that prevents that. Now I can come around the rose much more loosely and then make a square knot to tie that off. And that allows a little bit of wiggle room, but not much. Yeah, just a bit more soil. that's going to be just about perfect. I'm going to take that to the greenhouse and water it in. I've put the plant on the greenhouse bench, and now I'm going to water it. And I want to really saturate that soil with a lot of water. So I'm going to flood it several times. I want water gushing out the bottom. It may take a gallon or 4 liters of water to make that happen. But I want it really wet the whole way through. Now we have good water running out the bottom. That indicates it's saturated, and so I can consider that finished. I will put a sprinkler head into it, which I'll adjust later, and consider that a finished plant. Now I'm going to transplant a plant out into the garden. So this is a budded rose plant. It is currently in a 1-gallon pot, and I'm going to set it out permanently into Ruth's rose garden. As we discussed, I'm going to need to prune that somewhat so that the top is not using a lot of water once it's in the ground. Because we're just a few weeks after the normal pruning time for roses anyway, I don't mind pruning this pretty severely. I would much rather have it come out from an almost leafless stump and not have a lot of water stress early on than to try to keep a lot of size on it for right now. So I'm pruning back to good buds, but I'm not leaving a lot on there. That's probably pretty good. That's maybe more than I needed to take off of it, but that will make a nice start of a plant when we get that going out in the garden. I'm going to use a similar recipe here to what I used in the pot, but because the planting hole and the volume of soil involved is so much larger, I'm going to use much larger quantities. The milorganite is mainly a source of organic matter and also quite a lot of slow-release nitrogen. The Osmocote, actually I'm using Polyon brand, but it's similar, is a very slow-release material that gives nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The alfalfa pellets give organic matter, some nitrogen, and they also provide a plant growth regulating hormone called triacontanol, which is thought to cause roses to make extra branches from the base. That we call those basal breaks, and that's a good thing on a rose. K-mag is a good source of potassium as well as magnesium. Epsom salts is a good source of magnesium and sulfate. Gypsum is calcium and sulfate. Dolomite provides calcium and magnesium, as well as holding the pH up where it needs to be. STEM stands for soluble trace element mix. That's a mixture of all of the necessary micronutrients and secondary nutrients for the plant. And then TSP is triple superphosphate, which is a rich source of phosphorus that will last for several years. So I will have those already measured out into a bucket, and I'll dump them in at the proper time during planting. I'm not sure how windy it's going to be out in the garden and how much that may mess with the microphone. So let me talk a little bit before I go out as to exactly what I'm going to do. I really believe in planting a rose in a fairly large planting hole. There is a saying that you should never put a $20 rose bush in a $2 planting hole, and I think there's some wisdom in that. You only get one chance to plant it unless you're going to try to transplant it later, which is generally not a good idea. So it's best to do it right in the first place. So I'm going to use a full bag of potting soil. That is 2.8 cubic feet. And I'm going to dig a hole big enough to put that in. So that's quite a large planting hole compared to the size of this pot. I tend to claim, hoping to keep a straight face as I do it, that the planting hole has to be exactly 23.5 inches wide by exactly 18 inches deep. Of course, that's complete nonsense. Nobody's going to measure that. I'm certainly not going to measure that. As it turns out, if I just hang my elbows at my sides and hold my hands straight out, that width is 23.5 inches. And if I jump into the planting hole and measure up to the bottom of my kneecaps, that's 18 inches. And so that's where I came up with those numbers. They're not mystical, magical. You can grow a perfectly good rose in a bigger or smaller planting hole, but that's what I happen to use. Because we have very sandy soil here in Central Florida, I'm going to put a section of newspaper at the bottom of the hole. And I don't need very many pages here. I'll just do a couple pages. I don't want it to be terribly thick. That's good right there. And I'm going to lay that flat in the bottom of the hole. What that's going to do is slow down the drainage of water. It'll still drain because this is going to be flat against the bottom, but it'll be slow enough that while I'm planting, I can actually have a puddle of water there to put the rose in, and I consider that important too. Okay, maybe that's enough preliminary stuff. Let's go to the garden. We had a rose right here in the past, and so I'm technically replacing that rose. But just considering the way the others are spaced around it, I'm actually going to move the replacement out here. I think that'll be a little better spacing in the garden. So the first thing I want to do is remove last year's mulch. We have not yet got mulch for this year, but we like to use pine straw. So I'll save as much of this from last year as I can for now. And then decide exactly where I want this hole. I want it to be at least 4 feet from that bush, at least 4 from that. So I think this is going to be about where I want it. This garden, compared to most of Lakeland or Polk County, Florida soils, it's still sandy, but it has a lot more clay in it than a lot of soils around here have. So it's actually a pretty good soil for roses to start with. I still like to add a lot of organic matter, but I think one reason this garden has done so well is that we do have inherently good native soil. The white things you see there are the rhizomes of dollarweed, Hydrocotyle bonariensis, which is a really annoying weed. It's hard to get rid of. For no particularly good horticultural reason, but just because I'm kind of obsessive about it, I like to have a hole that's truly round, with truly vertical walls, and a truly flat level floor. Again, you could grow a perfectly good rose in an irregularly shaped hole, but I like doing it this way. So that's plenty wide enough. That's about my shoulder width, a little over 23 inches. Now I want to go down about 18 inches and then flatten the floor. If I were growing my roses in a different part of the world with heavier clay soils, I wouldn't go to all this effort. I would use a much smaller planting hole. If it was a bare root plant, I probably wouldn't add any organic matter at all. I would just plant it directly into the native clay or loam soil. But for our situation, I really believe in improving this soil quite a lot. I'm collecting the soil that I dig out in a big pot to be carried away. We can use it as fill dirt somewhere else on campus. And I may use some of it here to mix in with my potting soil, but I shouldn't need much of it to do that. I'll check the depth. That's almost deep enough. Yep, I like that as it is. So this is my planting hole. It has a fairly flat bottom to it. And now I'm going to get my section of newspaper and drop that in. I want that to lie pretty flat. It's going to be interesting to do while holding my phone as a camera. And I think that's pretty good like that. Now this is ready to have the full bag of potting soil dumped on top. The nice thing about digging a hole that size is that it takes almost exactly one bag of soil. It's standing up a little higher than the level now, but once that's watered in, it'll be just about right. Now I'm going to put my fertilizers. I've separated the fertilizers into 3 different groups. The first one I'm going to use is the triple superphosphate. It's very slow to react, very slow to be absorbed. So I've got 1/3 of a cup here. That's enough probably to use to run this rose bush for, oh, I don't know, 5 years or more. The thing is, if you distribute it through the soil, it tends to become less available. So what I'm going to do is dig a hole just with my fist down to the bottom of this hole. I should have done this before I dumped the potting soil in. I'm just going to dump that all in a pile right at the bottom. I don't want it mixed in at all. And then I have all of my other fertilizers here except for the Epsom salts. I'm going to save them for last. So I'm going to dump this on here and then take off my watch. I'm going to mix this in kind of like I did with the potted rose. It doesn't have to go all the way to the bottom, but I would like to have a good mix in at least the top half of this planting hole, with no significant lumps of fertilizer left anywhere. Now what I'm going to do is flood this hole. I want to really saturate that thoroughly with water. In fact, I'm going to let that just soak in while I go and get the rose. because of our excessively well-drained soil, I really like to do the planting actively underwater. I have this plant staked to a bamboo stake. I'm going to remove that stake from it. I don't want anything there that could girdle the stem later. I'm also going to take the label off. I'm going to lose track of what it is. I'm going to pop the plant out of the soil. That's ready to go. It does not have any particular coiling of the roots, so there's nearly nothing to be cut off there. Let me get this wet again. And then I'm going to dig a hole in the middle about the size of this pot. With the rows, I would like to have the new soil level almost exactly even with what it was in the pot, not planting it any deeper or any shallower. So that's just about perfect. I'll pack that in right there. And then it's ready to have a new stake applied. And I'm going to put this stake, this is a budded rose, so the bud is on my left, your right. So I'm going to put the stake down on the back side of that. Get my hammer. This stake is green plastic covered aluminum, so it's quite springy, but it's also quite strong. So that's probably good. Now, as I demonstrated for the potted plant, I'm going to tie this very tightly to the stake, but not to the rose. And then I'm going to come around a stem of the rose above the bud union. I could do it below if that were convenient. In this case, I'm going above. And just kind of snug it into the stake. I don't want it to be very tight. And then do a square knot there. And so that is planted. Now, I still have these Epsom salts. Epsom salts is a very water-soluble substance. So what I'm going to do is water this plant again thoroughly to really settle it in. Then I'm going to sprinkle the Epsom salts on and water that again in lightly. And what that will do is it'll allow it to bind to the soil particles. If you understand soil chemistry, this organic matter has a lot of cation exchange capacity. The magnesium in this is a cation. It will connect and hang on given some time, but I don't want to wash it away immediately. So I'm going to water again here. I'm going to sprinkle my Epsom salts around, not directly up next to the trunk, but kind of out maybe 6 or 8 inches in a donut. And I'll water that in again lightly in just a minute when that water is sunk in. I can see it's already pretty much dissolved. It's almost instantaneous. And then I'll push the mulch back in. Again, I wish I had a lot more mulch right now. We will be buying new mulch, pine straw, which I like to have it piled up several inches deep around the rows. Not only does it look good, it tends to hold water in, but I'll just have to hold off on that until I get some more pine straw. So I'll water this one more time and consider it done. We will put this on an automatic irrigation system that has a spritzer at the base of the plant, but for the first couple of weeks I will also supplement that with some hand watering, because I really want to keep that soil moist and get those roots growing rapidly out into it. One nice thing about Fortuniana rootstock roots is they will very rapidly populate that soil area. And that's it. I'll put the label on the stake, not on the rows. That way it will never pinch the rows, but it'll maintain an idea of what it is until we get it put on the map for the campus garden. And that's it. We should be back in good bloom in probably, if it stays hot like it is, 5 or 6 weeks. If we get some more cool weather still, it might be 7 weeks, but certainly no longer than that. And by then I would expect it to be up almost twice the size that it is now.